Alrighty, slight bit of breeze, hopefully it isn't stuffing up the microphone. I might talk about America's favourite subject that they seem to know so little about. I've known a bit for quite a while, and I think I might as well tell you a few things about Iran. So this is going to be a video about Iran in the real world versus the propaganda. And believe me, I'll put it like this: if you actually believe that the American private healthcare system is a good system, that is proof that today's propaganda is probably just as effective as Hitler's. Anyway, there's plenty of propaganda still about Iran. I'm not saying they're necessarily a nice country, but it seems between the propaganda, that's the only thing that everyone actually knows is just the propaganda and the hype stories. That's it. We don't know anything practical about Iran. I can't tell you fucking anything outside of propaganda. So anyway, what I'm going to tell you, a little bit of this comes from travel guides, and the majority of it, more than half anyway, comes from actual Iranians who have lived in Iran, of which there are a number over here who are on the run, so to say, from the regime. And a good chunk of this also comes from a American travel expert who's a... I can't remember his name, and it's surprising that I don't. He's very well known. He's got a lot of series on YouTube, but he's got sent over there by the United Nations. One of the things that you always... And he gave a great big talk, a few hours long, and I watched that on YouTube, and showed photos and everything. One of the things you always hear about Iran is a lot of things from the American perspective only. They fingerprint you when you enter the place. Yes, but only if you're American. If you're American, you'll get fingerprinted when you go over there. Aside from that, nah, you don't get fingerprinted. Aussie and New Zealander, English, you don't get fingerprinted, just Americans. And over there, they don't have a VIP lounge in the airport, the international airport, but they do have a CIP lounge. You don't have a very important person's lounge. But a lot of the foreigners, especially if they are somebody or they've got special business, they end up in the CIP lounge, which stands for commercially important people. I'm not joking. That's the fancy pants lounge at the airport, is CIP, commercially important people. Bit strange. Over there, they say they need nuclear power. I don't really think they do, but having said that, one thing they do need is to learn to conserve energy. According to travel guides, and according to something said by an actual Iranian, my parents know, they have chronic issues with energy. Not lack of, but just the ability to actually save it. According to travel guides, they don't boil the kettle when they need to have a cup of tea. They fill the kettle full, sit it on the stove, crank the stove up, get it to boil, then cut it back to a simmer. And they leave the damn thing simmering all fucking day. And once or twice a day, she just about runs out of water because it steams out. So then they refill the bloody thing, 2-3 times a day, maybe 4 times a day. Obviously once in the morning. And they just keep it simmering all the time. All the time. And they leave the gas stove going the entire day. That's according to travel guides. Also, according to travel guides, same sort of attitude with air conditioning. Everyone goes home for a long weekend or religious holiday or whatever, or a normal weekend, and they just leave the air conditioning going. like 9 months of the year, the fucking thing never gets turned off. They probably lose the damn remote, but they just leave the damn thing on. And even if they can turn it off, it's just left on. You go home and you leave it on. You go home for the weekend and you leave it on. You never turn the damn air conditioning off, except maybe for the colder months of the year, which would probably only be about 3 months of the year. Rest of the time, just leave the air conditioning on. And that's the way they are with air conditioning. Their ability to preserve power is fucking hopeless. Yeah. They have probably the cheapest fuel in the world. Now, as you know, in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and other places around there, the fuel is fuck all. It's probably about cost price. Shockingly low. You fill a tank for fucking beer money. It's nothing. The cost per gallon is not dollars, it's just cents. It's shockingly cheap. They've got it one better. They've got it below cost. I believe it's pretty much a government-controlled or pretty highly controlled industry due to the Anglo-Iranian oil company and the whole debacle that happened with England there, and the president they had come in who tried to kick the British out but then somehow keep the oil, but the trouble is all the engineers were British, so they deliberately sabotaged the refinery by turning taps off and disconnecting things and turning taps the wrong way and shit like that, and hiding a lot of parts and things like that. They had a dude there who come in who almost jumped the gun on them by asking the American government to help him. He was renowned for pretending to faint, and when people were losing interest in what he was saying, he would pretend to faint, and then everyone would, and he'd get everyone's interest back. He was a chronic one for that. He's a funny-looking guy, and I think he was bald with a big nose and a whole bunch of teeth missing or something like that. He looked pretty rough around the edges. Forget his name, but he actually came to the Americans and said, I'm a poor country with low amounts of production, with poor people and not much to produce, but I need to borrow money off you. And what he wanted to borrow the money off was to hire American or some other than English, some other oil workers to get the refinery back on track and to start production of the oil again, and then be able to sort of get the country rolling on that. And basically they ultimately turned him down for a loan, although they come close to giving it to him, and they said, look, you got some of the biggest, you got a quarter of the world's oil reserves or something like this, or the quarter of the known reserves at the time. And it was actually funnier to him than it was to the American president that he was asking for a loan. But the thing is that if he had got that loan, he would have got out of the grip of the British. But then, may have fallen from the grip of the British into the grip of fucking ExxonMobil or something like that, So it could have been out of the frying pan into the fire. But that was one of the key things, was that they were pissed off that they knew the British were just taking the oil for peanuts and selling it for quite a lot. And they wanted a cut of it all, understandably. But anyway, that's the old days. Of course, they had another one which is installed pretty much by the CIA, or something like that. And he got the boot in 79, was it? So the 78 or 79, I'm pretty sure it's 79, by the famous dude, well-known Islamic guy there. I can't remember his name, but probably half of you do. Shit. You know who I mean, anyway. dark under the eyes, big beard, always wearing the blooming, robes and all that business. Anyway, well, they got rid of the other guy this other guy used to spend money like wildfire. And he'd have great big parties. Only foreigners would be invited. No locals. Not even super rich locals or anything. And they got sick of him pandering so much to other people because he was a puppet. There was one point there he sold oil for a little above cost price. And then the profits that he made from that oil, which was sold to America, he blew all those profits on a whole stack of trucks and military equipment. But he had nowhere to put them. So they went and parked them out in a fucking desert. And they just parked them out, and there was there was a few hundred acres. There was hundreds of acres. I think it was more than 300 acres of trucks and tanks and all this shit. And he spent pretty much all they'd sold oil for a little above cost price, but any of the profit that they made, they'd blown all that profit with American arms manufacturers. So at the end of the day, they'd sold the oil for peanuts to America, then spent it all on American arms. And they didn't have anywhere to keep these things. First of all, they didn't need them, really speaking. And secondarily, they had nowhere to keep them. So they parked them out in the desert, and there was hundreds of acres of these things out in the desert. And they sat there with no cover in the desert sun and the bloody chronic. And they fucking are chronic. If you've seen photos of it, they are unbelievable. And the Americans found that out the hard way trying to rescue the embassy hostages that time. But sandstorms. Sandstorms are unbelievable in Iran, and these sandstorms are so harsh between the harsh sun and the paint that obviously couldn't hold up to UV and probably was as thin as fuck anyway, the paint on them. And the sandstorms, they literally sandblasted the bonnets clean of paint on these trucks and, other things. I bet you there's probably Jeeps there and stuff. I don't know exactly if there's tanks, but I do know for a fact there's a hell of a lot of trucks. And, they basically all rusted to shit. They all just turned to shit and they went to scrap metal. The whole fucking lot of them. But they got rid of that guy and got in the old Islamic dude who used to be set up in I can't remember his name. It's on the tip of my tongue. He used to be set up in France for a while there. He was in exile and he was in France, and then he came back and took over the show. And the saying they had over there amongst the locals is that the devil or the demon flew out of one window and another one come in the other window. So they got rid of one demon out one window and then another one come in the other window. So, rid of one arsehole and then replaced by another arsehole. So that was pretty much how it's been seen. Amongst the movement today with the government that's trying to get them out is the upper class. It's the richies. It's the richies. They are moderate Islam, whereas the government's more a hardline Islam. And you'll see it amongst richer women. When you get out to the back street, when you're on the main streets, all the women are covered up, the flipping, you got not necessarily the hijab that's like the nun thing, but they've got their hair covered. That's one of the things. It's not questionable or anything. It's just straight out law. You have to have your hair covered, including your fringe. And on the main street, they got the fringe covered. You get into the back blocks, into the suburbs, and girls sort of just let a bit of their fringe hang down out the front. They don't really give a shit. The worst of them all, so to speak, are the rich girls who, they have it start back here somewhere, and they don't just let a little bit hang out, they let quite a lot hang out, and only have instead of having like a more solid fabric, they got like a real thin, fine, silky stuff over their head instead of the thicker stuff. Not like bed sheet stuff, it's like, real fine stuff, and they let quite a lot of fringe, like just about the whole thing, hang out. And they're more moderate, and they don't like a lot of the bullshit. And yes, it is true and I've heard this directly from an Iranian girl who's about 20 years old, that women can't drive cars in Iran. That is true. It's the same in Saudi Arabia and all that, but in Iran, they can't drive cars. Coming from another Iranian family who, I won't name any names because they're technically on the run from the government, they do have, there's another religion you never heard of, Zoroastrians, which is a fucking weird thing. It's one of the first religions to only have one god. It has a lot of astronomy shit in it, I think. Possibly a bit of alien shenanigans. But long story short, they're centered in one city, and they're allowed to continue on with their business. And so are the Christians, if you were born a Christian or born a Zoroastrian. Zoroastrians are also known for, in this city that they're centered in, they've got a great big compound section, and you seem to notice that around this giant big walled section, you'll see a few towers off in the distance. You might not take much notice. You don't want to get the binoculars out, trust me. But they've got this big walled off compound, and there seems to be a lot of bloody vultures and crows and shit hanging around. They don't bury their dead, they have air burials, and those big towers, they stick the dead bodies on, and the vultures fucking go for it. Yeah, that's Zoroastrians. Fan-bloody-tastic. I told you don't want to get the binoculars out. Anyway, not getting religiously narky here. They're allowed to do their own thing if they're born Zoroastrians. Christians are allowed to do their own thing if they're born Christian. And this guy said that, you know, it's fine over there for Christians as long as you're born Christian. Only trouble is he was born Muslim, and so was his wife, and they converted to Christianity, and then all fucking hell rains loose. And basically, you will be forced to change back or threatened with getting put in a dungeon or probably get your life threatened or something like that, and pretty much the only option is you better get out of the country bloody quick. And so that's how a lot of them have ended up here. A lot of them used to come on boats. They've been coming since the late 90s actually, but there's a few around, and I might be involved. I don't know, we'll have to see. I might get involved in their society. I find it very intriguing because it's one of these countries where you don't hear anything except hyped up fucking, oh, nukes, nukes, this, that, nukes, nukes. And that's about all you hear. You know, it's more, reminds me of Soviet Union propaganda except worse. You know, I'm not saying the Soviet Union was great, not saying they weren't full of shit, but it was like everything in here was just like alarm bell, freak-outism, nuke ICBM, bomb, missiles, all this sort of stuff. But it's interesting joint. Another thing that's very interesting about Iran, and you know I'm going to hit on this being me, is the banking system. So they say, it's one of the few banks that the Rothschilds hasn't got into. So the conspiracy theorists reckon. It's very intriguing. I don't know if they have inflation problems. I will have to ask and find this out. The money. I think I don't know if they got a thing, it's just inflation problems Venezuela style or what, but and I don't know if they're opposed to really changing their money or destroying their money or what, but you have to buy a lot of things with wads of cash. Yeah, it's a joint where you need a suitcase full of cash to buy a car, or more than a suitcase full. Even hotel stays overnight, you're using fucking wads of notes that 8 wads that thick, you know, like it's just, everything is fucking bundles of cash. They now have another thing over there which has been happening for the last 10 years or so, where it's like it's a bank check basically. But it's not a bank check that you cash in and it goes into your account. People get to using bank checks almost like normal monetary notes. And they will draw that bank check on one individual branch of an individual bank. It has that hypothermic ink or whatever it is, where you put your finger over and it fades, or whatever it is, and then you take your finger away and it just disappears with the warmth of your finger, then comes back. They've got that shit, which they've got on some of the checks here. By the way, checks here, they're just about to phase. They reckon the days of checks are numbered in this country. They're going to phase them out. For those, I gather in America, they, from something that a certain person in New York told me, that checks are pretty normal, but over here, only businesses have checks, and they're trying to get rid of checks altogether. But bank checks are different from normal checks because they're drawn directly on a bank. They're signed off by the manager here, and I think it's much the same thing there. But they draw them not on a bank, but on an actual individual branch. And, well, then again, you get the branch manager to sign the ones here. But anyway, it's got to the point where they use bank checks over there as in place of using fucking 8 4-inch bundles of cash to, because you just get sick of filling your pockets up with friggin' bundles of cash. I don't know if it's an inflation problem. I don't think it. I think it is, but it's like they're using the same damn money that they had ever since 1979 or something, when the Shah come in, which is a guy I was trying to remember before. I think Shah is just a title, like Mullah or something like that as a title, but yeah. Anyway, what's the other one? Yeah, around the nuclear power station, you've got big piles of dirt too, so you can't really see it from the road. There's a big highway that goes not too far from it, and they put big piles of dirt to sort of hide it. Another bloody bizarre thing about Iran. You can hardly believe this. They've tried to. I found this in National Geographic magazine. They try to restart forestation in the desert. You know how to do it? They pump up crude oil and they spray it over the fucking sand. They go through quite a lot of oil in the process, so they didn't do it to heaps of it. But it sort of helps retain the water in the ground or some shit, like any rain that comes down the next year or whatever. It holds it in. The next rainy season, it holds it in. And then the forests come back, and you come back 5 years' time and there's friggin' all these little trees growing everywhere. Just by spraying crude oil on the ground. It's unbelievable, but hey, that's one thing they've done which is very bizarre, very strange. They, as well as trying to have government control of oil there, what I was going to say about oil is it's one of the few places where it's actually below cost and it's subsidised. And it was like that until the late 90s, early thousands. And then they were going to take the subsidies off and make people pay cost price, probably much the same as Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, United Arab Emirates. And people were sucking and bitching that they were going to have to pay cost price for petrol because they've always paid below cost price for petrol for so many years. I think they must take some of the export earnings of oil and put it into subsidising the oil for the locals. No shit. As a result, just as you expected, that's half of what causes their lack of ability to give a shit about conserving any energy. It also causes their lack of ability to give a rat's ass about fixing cars up. And if your car's running like a piece of shit because the engine's just about buggered and the rings are burnt out and it's really just about game over, but you can still drive it fine with the choke pulled out and use 3 times the amount of fuel, you'll just pull the choke out and use 3 times the amount of fuel because that'll be cheaper than fixing the damn engine. And so that's what happens. If you thought driving in China was bad, or those of you who have been to India and seen the way they drive in India, that's bad. And it's just as bad as Pakistan. And it's even worse in Afghanistan. And it is exceedingly worse in Iran. Iran is probably the worst place in the fucking world to drive. It is so exceedingly bad. This is coming from Iranians who live there and travel books. You will see some bullshit when it comes to driving shenanigans. People cutting you off and jumping the friggin' curb all the time. They reckon if it wasn't for road signs, for signs mounted on the edge of the footpath, like parking signs, all that sort of shit, the pedestrians would be dead, pretty much. It's shockingly ridiculous. There is one city that has these giant drains on the side of the road too to drain out water, and people have got to park beside these drains, and half the time they go whoop, and they sort of jump the wheel into the drain, and then they're fucked, and they've got to play around with the jack and try and crowbar the bloody thing out, or tow truck to lift the bloody thing out of the drain. That's an entire city that's got these great big stone drains that always end up causing a few shitstorms in regards to people who went a little bit too far when they tried to park the car. Yeah, the pollution there, probably because of what I was saying about burning the engines out, is just fucking unbelievable. It's terrible. Smog is terrible. Traffic jams are bloody chronic. This is coming from an Iranian who's lived there and all that. People cut you off. The traffic jams last. It reminds me a bit of that mate of my uncle's who was an oil rigger who said about the 5-hour traffic jams in Cairo. Well, it's not much better in Iran. This bloke who has lived in Iran said that sometimes it will take you an hour and a half to drive to work when you could have walked to work in half an hour. In other words, it takes you 3 times as long to get to work by car as it does on foot. So long as you go where there's plenty of road signs so you don't just about get flattened. It's fucked up. Also, a lot of people smoke. Now, you may have heard in certain places, Islamic countries don't really like smoking to a big degree, but there are quite a lot of them that allow it, although that's not sort of really encouraged. And in Iran, heaps of people smoke on a regular basis. And between the bad smog and the bloody cigarettes, there's a lot of people who only live to about the age of 68. A lot of men only live to about 68. And the vast majority of them die of lung problems. Like, I'm talking a huge majority, probably 70-80%. Ultimately, they end up going downhill in the last days of their life due to lung problems. It's a chronic thing. Between smoking and smog, they're just wiping themselves out with lung problems. Yeah. What was the other one I was going to say? You might have trouble believing this one, but it is true, and I've seen video footage of it. Well, it's not actually that hard to see photos of. They got a great big mountain, which is one of the prides of their nation. Well, they do skiing on the mountain. That's right, they have a couple of ski places. I don't know if there's ski resorts, but I know there's at least 2 mountains there that they ski down. And these are sort of nationally significant mountains, and all the riches drive out, if they can actually get out, of the capital, and during the right times of the year they go up and they ski. But primarily if you're rich, because of course, it's there probably wouldn't be enough room for everybody, and I wouldn't be surprised if they got some way of charging people, making a bit of money out of the whole ski resorts there. They drink a lot of mint tea as well, and although you basically never see sugar cubes in Australia, they have sugar cubes there on a pretty regular basis. I don't know if they have them in America or not, but I know they use them in Iran and drink a lot of mint tea, usually in glasses. Yeah, they drink tea in glasses. Like, clear glass, not a mug. And they have a lot of these guys who, not a lot of them, but there's places you go to and it's like a storytelling sort of thing. And they tell a lot of these old stories from probably 200 years back or so. that are sort of based on, you know, they've got a moral to these stories. So you go to these places and they're basically tea houses. And, you know, tea houses are common in China, Pakistan, India, all that. I mean, hell, I've even been to one down in Melbourne down here. And they've got a tea house there, which is a bit like a cafe, but you sit inside and you drink tea. And, yeah, a lot of these joints, to encourage patrons to come in there at night, you know, you can come into your tea house and like the one down in the capital here, you can, you know, most likely get small amounts of food. I'm not talking, you know, heaps of food. Just little things, not like whole meal, just like little snacks, like a few chicken wings and whatever. And that was the same as the one down in the capital down here that I've been to. And then you have one of the storytelling guys, and he tells, you know, this story that's, you know, got a morals of the story, and it's one of these old stories from way back. And that's a common enough thing. Funny thing is, this travel guide always has all the mentions of the night spots and the nightclubs in the Lonely Planet series of travel guides. And this one, you go to Iran and you're looking through their travel guide and you go to Tehran or something, nightclubs, and it just says, "Get real" as the response to that written in the travel guides. I thought that was a ripper to put that in a travel guide. You know, you look at the one for Paris, you know, night spots, and there's friggin' shitloads of them, and you know, nightclubs, bang, bucketfuls of them, and then you know, Iran, get real. It says there. While we may be primarily concerned about money, or if you're in America, consumeristic goods. Things like that. In Iran, you know, and some people, you know, left-wing politics or right-wing politics, in Iran, their primary concern is not being rich or anything like that. Their number one thing is sort of religion and morals, but morals are a big, big thing. Their worst nightmare is for their daughter to turn out like Britney Spears. You know, they would just about be committing hurry-curry if their daughter was a slut, put it like that. Morals are a very big thing. You have TV stations there whereby if you want meditational music to pray to, go to Channel 5. And during prayer times in the morning, or during this time to that time for like 3 hours in the morning, or maybe even more, maybe 5 hours, they've got these, you know, meditational religious songs to pray to, you know, and there's a whole heap of, you know, you can listen to, you know, a mufti preaching or readings of the Quran or the Quran verse for the day on this other channel. And this is the kind of shit they got on the TV channels. Very religious based, and they're very moral centred. There's an Iranian woman my mum knows over here. She is shocked at seeing young women smoke because I think it's very abnormal. Men smoke a hell of a lot in Iran, but I don't think women smoke. And it's terrible to see a young woman smoking. All the women are buttoned right up to the neck, like they're right up to the neck. And even when they come over here, they still are. And even though they're converted from Islam to Christianity, they still just got the habit of putting a scarf on. But there's more to the story of the scarf thing. But anyway, they see it as disgraceful. And this is the women, you know, they go, oh, women are so oppressed. They've got to wear, you know, they've got to cover themselves up and they've got to put the scarf on and all this. They're so oppressed over there. The women of Iran, and this is coming straight from a young woman who's come from Iran, who's probably, you know, I don't know, about my age or something, maybe mid-20s, mid-30s. They're disgusted when they see girls walking around and you can see cleavage. And I don't mean tits falling out, I just mean you can see the top of their cleavage, and they're horrified that you can see the top of their cleavage, and heaven forbid they're smoking as well, and they're like, oh, that's disgusting, oh, that's such a horrible situation, you know, a young girl shouldn't be putting herself out like that. This is how the women feel there. It's not they're oppressed, they actually think it's horrible to show your cleavage and to smoke. They think it's disgraceful. They think it's just terrible that women of 23 with a cigarette in their hand and you can see a little bit of cleavage because they're buttoned right up the neck. it's a moral thing. Even after you have converted from Islam to Christianity, it's still a moral thing. They still sort of hang on to that moral thing. And same with the scarf. As time goes on, they get looser and looser on the scarves, and sometimes they just chuck them away altogether. But I've been reading another travel guide, well, actually not another one, the same one, and American woman went over to Iran and married an Iranian. The scarf thing comes from something having on your head. She travels back to the States every now and then and says that she can't not handle having something on her head. So you get so used to a scarf being on your head that when or a hijab or whatever, that when you don't have one on your head, it feels too cold, something's missing, I should have something sitting there, it doesn't feel right, it feels too bare, it feels like I'm going bald, and as a result, they just keep having a scarf because it feels strange. And even, as I said, American woman, when she comes back to the States, she feels there's something wrong because there's not something on her head. So, she's always wearing a baseball cap because it just doesn't feel right without something on your head. And so that's sort of part of why they continue to wear the scarf thing, is because they're just so used to it that it just feels like you're going bald or you're going freezing cold in the head if you don't. So they continue on wearing it. What's some of the other ones? You don't get welfare there. No welfare system. If you're out of a job, there's only one network you can turn to, and it's your family. When you retire, your kids look after you because you ain't getting any old age pension either. No old age pension, no unemployment pension. Just don't happen. You don't get welfare. A lot of families are quite large, and you've got to hope that your family's large and your family's generous enough, or you're fucked. Or you got to get a job doing something real nasty real fast, because it's just the way it is. There's just no welfare system. So anyway, I think I've covered everything from one side of Mars to the other, and I'm sure I'll come along more stuff and be able to tell you other things as time goes on. They're not Arab, they're Persian. They are genetically different, quite genetically different from Arabs. They're not Arabs, they're Persian. And if you want to really know the point, they are technically white people. That's right, they are technically white people. And if you look above them on the map, guess what? There's other white people they call Russians. Go figure. Apparently, long story. My uncle used to know the story of where the Iranians come from and where they originated from, but they're not Arabs, and I'd have a guess that they didn't, I don't know, they probably did originate from there because they had the Persian Empire. Iranians are Persian, and that was the Persian Empire, which was around in Jesus' time, but in it all, they don't originate from Arabs anyway. And my uncle did tell me the whole story once. I sort of, not the whole story, but a bit of the story, but I forgot it all now anyway. But they are technically white people, and some of the ones I've seen locally, they get the little moustache going on the women as they sort of get over 40-something years of age, get into their late 40s, they could do with a little bit of a shave. But there are quite a few of them who are brown-haired and brown-eyed. That's actually the norm, to be brown-haired and brown-eyed. But you do come across the odd one, that's blue or slightly green-eyed or, hazel-eyed sort of thing. And they are technically white people.